So thank you very much, Ahmed and Dr. Allah, for coming, and let me just explain a little bit about how I came to be here. I'm the external examiner in management now, having finished 2 years previously as systems engineering external examiner, and this year in Skype, the examination meeting, the public lecture that I'm due to give this time, Dr. Allah said it's going to be this time dealing with management, and this really, if you don't mind the pun, it put my head in the spin of what I was going to talk about. So I thought, let me talk about something I've never talked about before. And here at the moment, just looking around the audience, there was a famous author in Edinburgh called Walter Scott. And he wrote many books, and in Edinburgh there's a huge monument in the city called the Scott Monument to all the books that Walter Scott wrote. And he invited some friends for dinner one night, and it was a heavy snowstorm, and nobody turned up. And afterwards, Walter Scott said, he said it was the most distinguished company they'd ever dined with. He had dined alone. So it's a very, you don't need a big number. So we're a very distinguished company here tonight. And here we go. But who am I to be able to talk? Well, here we are. Here we are. The University of Edinburgh. Okay, and this link up with, and I was saying to Ahmed, I'm a professor at Edinburgh University. I was a student at Glasgow University. And next month I'll go to Manchester University to examine their undergraduate students. So there we are. And look at the two universities, okay. British University in Egypt, in Dubai, 2004. Edinburgh, 1852, more than 400 years ago. And interesting enough, 1868 was the first professor of engineering, and that was at the height of the Industrial Revolution in the UK, where there was no, Edinburgh University taught law, it taught languages, it taught divinity, but there was no, it taught physics and chemistry and mathematics, but there was no engineering. And the professors of science, chemistry and mathematics, went to see the head of the university, the vice chancellor, and said, look, this industrial revolution, we need to have engineering taught here in the university because of the number of requests that we are getting. And so the principal, the head of the university, went and spoke to the government, and the government said, we'll ask the Queen, who was the Victoria in those days, and the Queen said, yes, that's a good idea. I'll pay for half the salary of a professor of engineering at the university, you can find the other half. And because it was an appointment from the Queen, it was called the Regius Professor. And next year is the 150th anniversary of the founding of the first, and I was the 7th appointment in 100 years as the Queen's Professor at Edinburgh University, and every day I was only conscious of this honour. But you still got a job to do, and it had to be done with it after that. But here we are. So who am I? As explained, I've got a doctorate from Glasgow University. I was a young lecturer in Aberdeen University, and the basis of my research there, that university awarded me a Doctor of Science for my research. I had an experience every year as a young student. I used to work in a big company as an apprentice electrician to gain industrial experience, and also getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and clocking in at 7:30. And my father made me sure that I wasn't sleeping in. And after I graduated, I went to work in Newcastle. And I'll talk later on about Transtec. And that was early experience of transferring technology into industry. My professor, go back again. Oh, it actually went the wrong way. Other way. I'm sorry, I thought I would muck this up somewhere. Is there a... All right, okay, okay, that might be better, thank you. Yeah, otherwise I'm spoiling the story. Yeah, I'm sorry. There usually is a button in these things where you can actually just go down. That's right. So there was. I was the 7th appointment of the Queen's Professor, and that in Glasgow University were the 2 universities in the UK where, because of big industrial base in Glasgow, and there is now a 3rd Professor of Engineering appointed by the Queen, who is now in Cambridge because of the Queen's, when she became 90. So let's go on. What the devil is going on? So there we are. Here's my experience, okay. I'm sorry, it's... Okay, I think I'll try and keep it going. But my main experience, my professor, who was... I think I'll try and do it from here, actually. This one here. I'll do it from there, that's fine. All right, further on. So my main experience really was in... I went to a university near to Leeds, Leicester, to finish a PhD. In those days, people needed a postdoctoral experience, and I went to Australia, and then I ended up in Edinburgh University. My main field is probably my friend, my colleague say, you either worked in manufacturing, biomedical engineering. I had no experience of that until I went to Edinburgh University. And I met by chance an orthopaedic surgeon who asked me what I did for a living, and I said I'm a mechanical engineer. And he said, could you help me out with a problem I've got of an implant that had broken inside a patient. And with a colleague, we redesigned his material for him, and we gave it to the surgeon. And after that, another of his colleagues brought a problem, and then another technical problem, and I became Edinburgh University. And now there is an institute for bioengineering in Edinburgh University. So one of these goes south. So on we go. So what do I really do for a living? As Dr. Alla know, most of my work had been working with the aircraft engine companies, essentially drilling holes in next time you go in an aircraft, look at the big blades that suck in the air. And a lot of my technology really was working on new materials for jet engines and how to shape them, and using a technique called electrochemical machining. And as a young lecturer, and Dr. Allen knows too, if you've got a good boss, they really can bring out the best of you. When I went to Aberdeen University, the professor of engineering was a civil engineer, and he said he encouraged me to write a book on electrochemical machining. And I was just in my early 30s. And I found that, and that really inspired me to go on and do research. And off we went. As a young lecturer, you seem to it was expected that you should actually get research grants in to help you with your work. And believe it or not, my first 3 papers were in the Journal of the Institute of Mathematics and its Applications, Mathematical Theory of Electrochemical Machining, and in 1 paper in Transactions of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. But so I was really an engineering scientist, and then the head of department circulated a note saying that there were grants becoming available from a body called the Wolfson Foundation, which is a big charitable trust in the UK, where they were given grants for applied research that in some way would help manufacturing industry in the United Kingdom. Now this was now the mid-1970s, and I hadn't realised at the time how bad, I was just a young lecturer, how badly off manufacturing was becoming in the UK. They lost most of the car industry. Lots of the companies closed down. And an essential part of this scheme was that you had to have a small company who would be prepared to exploit the results of your research. And that was a condition of getting a grant. And so I applied for a grant to use electrochemical machining combined with another technique called spark erosion, that's actually used here in Dubai. And the company wrote me a very nice letter, the managing director, saying they would support the application. And I applied for a grant, and the grant was awarded. I remember the sum to this day. The letter was sent not to me, but it was sent to the Vice Chancellor of the university, and he passed it to the finance officer and said, "Did you know about this application?" And the finance officer said, "Yes, we did know about it. We approved it before it was sent in." And I learned two lessons. If you're going to do anything like that, you put it through the administration, get them to approve it. And a patent was taken out with a body called the National Research and Development Corporation, which is a body that was aimed to protect intellectual property for staff members in universities in the UK. So I solved two criteria. First of all, it was novel, there was intellectual property protected, and I had a small company who could benefit from the work. What I didn't know was at the time that part of the reason for this push to get people in universities to develop new technology was that the trade balance in the United Kingdom really was going down. The trade balance, all that means is that the amount that a country exports has to be more than they're importing. And the people in the government they plotted this, that's 1970, and I was coming in round about here, and they had told the Wolfson Foundation and other people that they had to do something about it. I didn't know that at the time, and that's why they wanted these young researchers to come in and to come up with novel ideas where they could help manufacturing industry. And look at that, 1980. Now that was before oil was discovered in the North Sea. Maybe this is the wrong audience today, but that's exactly the position that we're actually back in the UK, because oil has run out. And with Brexit, we mentioned Brexit once yesterday, but with Brexit, who knows whether this will happen again. And on we go. And what I didn't know too was that the brains behind a lot of these discussions was somebody called Williamson. And Williamson had studied engineering at Edinburgh University, and he had invented an amplifier that became known as the Williamson amplifier, which was the forerunner of high fidelity quality music. And then he had worked for a big company called Ferranti in Edinburgh, still exists with a new name called, I think it's called Leonardo. And he had pioneered computer-aided manufacture. And he was the one, because of all his renown, he was the one that joined this body, government body, that composed of industrialists, trade unions, and then eminent scientists and engineers like him. And he was one that spotted this decline. And he had gone back to the government and said, you've got to push academics to do work that can turn this trade balance round. And he had become, because of his renown, he had become chairman of the body in the UK that supported grants to academics. And Dr. Rala, before we came in, you're applying with Prof. And so here we were. And he had also spotted another problem as chairman of the Engineering for the Science and Engineering Research Council, that a simple task of mould making, how to make a mould or dye, that these people were literally a dying race. It was formally passed from father to son, and from the son on to his son. It was dirty work, But the sons, instead of wanting to continue the trade, what were they doing? Their father said, why don't you go to university and get an education? And so that as a trade was dying out. And Williamson again said, look, you've got to go back to the universities and get them to replace old technology with new technology. And I found myself, and I heard about this program, and I applied for research, for grants in the work. And I then became involved in a program for making dyes and moulds using this kind of technology, electrochemical machining, and also its sister process called electric discharge machining. And there were 4 universities chosen where this expertise lay. Myself, and I moved from Aberdeen to Edinburgh. Colleagues at Birmingham, and they moved to Warwick University, a big technological university. And you and I were talking earlier about Cranfield, which is a postgraduate university. And that's where the expertise in the UK lay in these fields. Welcome. And this was like no research program that I had actually ever experienced before. There was a member of the research council, and he came to, once a week, he would come to one of these universities. And the drive was to get this technology out as quickly as you could into industry. And if you were veering from the program, which academics are inclined to do, you'd be told at once, you get back onto track, you get back into what you're supposed to be doing here. And my old boss, the professor, or the head of the Department of Engineering, he didn't know what to think. He was a kind of classical engineering scientist. And this young lecturer was now heading into applied research. But nonetheless, it was actually exciting and stimulating, especially with that. Being told, Wolfson Foundation, and now the Research Council, you've got to keep going in this direction. My friends in Birmingham, there was a very bright researcher there called Dr. Fawzi Yamuchabi, who, as the name suggests, was actually an Egyptian. He'd studied at Liverpool University. And he was also working in the same program. And the question, he had no company to exploit the work. And this was really a big dilemma. How was this going to, how was this work going to be exploited? I didn't speak for a Birmingham University, but a former managing director of a big company in the UK called Jaguar Cars, very wealthy industrialist, and I didn't know him at the time. He stepped forward and said, look, I'll set up a company called, and it became known as Transfer Technology, to exploit the work of Dr. Fawzi. And Dr. Fawzi left the university and he became a director of what became known as Transtec. And meantime, I was feeling quite comfortable, and I was working with my firm, Healy and Leicester, and then I got a message saying that Healy had been taken over by a big company, and the big company looked at the balance sheet for Healy. They were making a profit, but they weren't making a big profit, and the company was closed down. And for me, as a young academic, again, this is with no management. I had no experience of management, and Fawzi had no experience of management. Yet we were being expected to deliver our researches into industry. And that's why, at some stage, I started to realise the benefits of management. But it really was a big dilemma, And Fawzi phoned me up, and he said, could you not put your researches through Transtec? And I spoke to I spoke to my own university about it, and again, another lesson I've learned. If you've got a problem like that, you go and see the boss. Go and see the boss. If the boss says yes, you can do it. If the boss says no, forget about it. But I went to see the principal of the university, Vice Chancellor, who was a biologist. I explained my dilemma to him, and he said, I think you should actually go and do this. I think you should go and do it. And so, at that time, I was actually running a department. And I said, well, how can I do this? How can I run a department and see all this work through into industry at the same time? And the Research Council came forward and said, look, we'll have you appointed an industrial fellow where we'll reimburse the university for your time. And I said, well, I've got a young family too. They said, okay, we'll do it on a part-time basis. And I took that message to the principal, the Vice Chancellor again. He said, I think you should go and do this. I think you should go and do it. Do it part-time, but I don't want you doing any undergraduate teaching while you're doing this. And when you're out of the office, the Dean said, there has to be an acting head of department, and you've got to have full confidence in him. If he makes a decision, you abide by it. But all this was actually for the benefit of the UK economy. And that's something that really kept us going. So here's me, 2 days a week, Transtec. Fawzi was in full time. But having that expertise together, and also finally, you've actually, Spinoff companies, you've actually got to work with, you've actually got to work with people. Fawzi was very kind of voluble, very, very bright. I was a Scot, but the two was actually, he would tell me where the applications were coming in, and I would take the technology, my technology, combine it with his, and the companies would come to forward. And these were, look at some of the companies, GKN, huge company, Rolls-Royce, and I learned a lesson. If you want new technology to be delivered, if you've got the big companies wanting that technology, you'll get it. Big companies, if the big companies say they want it, they'll do it. They'll do it at a price, but if they want it, government will say, okay, you do it. And the money started to flow in from the government, trade and industry to build what became known as pre-production orders. And the British Steel, which is now known as Tata Steel. And this Royal Aircraft is established. That's where the first jet aircraft in the UK were Frank Whittle. So these were the people that were giving us the orders for work. For academics who had no management experience. But the chairman, the managing director of the company, was an industrialist. And he was the one who looked at the books. Looked at the books. And he made it that money was coming in to cover all the costs of running the companies. Back in Edinburgh, before my time, a very far-sighted professor of electrical engineering called Farvis, he had seen the arrival of microelectronics. And he was the first professor of electrical engineering. And on his appointment, he said he wanted to take his department in the direction of uses of silicon. Now, today, we actually just recognize silicon as a material that's the basis of all computing technology. And this is early days. And he even persuaded the government of the day to install a laboratory in his department where they could use the laboratory for industry. It became known as Silicon Glen. It's mostly Silicon Valley in California, where local companies could draw university expertise in order to make silicon chips to the specification. And that became an absolutely invaluable source. And it spurred new industry in Scotland because of the demise of shipbuilding and traditional industries. And Farvis went on, and just as a young lecturer, I got a grant from the Wolfson Foundation. Farvis, he went to the Wolfson Foundation as well. And he said, can I have a grant to set up a consultancy unit to support semiconductors companies in Scotland. And he got a grant as well. So there are now 2 of these grants in Scotland. And surprisingly, both of them in Edinburgh. And that ran for 14 years. And while I was an academic and a professor, he had a young kind of lecturer level, but running this consultancy unit full time. Me in mechanical engineering, I was fortunate enough to get somebody who'd been in industry, aged about 59 or 60, to come and help me to run my Wolfson unit. Far as he had gone the other route, he had got somebody young. And they built that up till 1984, purely as a consultancy unit. And then they decided now was that they wanted now to set this up as a spin-off company. That became the first spin-off company from Edinburgh University. And where did the money come from? It came, a third of it came from the university. Universities are the birthplace of education. A third of the investment came from the university. They went to the finance houses, and there are lots of, Edinburgh's a big finance centre, and people looking where to invest my, where do I want to invest my money, and where can I get my return on the money. And a third, interesting enough, David Milne, who was the young academic and the professor of electrical engineering, they said, we'll invest some of our money in the company. And in terms of risk, the question is, if you believe in it, are you prepared to take the financial risk to put your money into it? And if the answer is no, well, you'll probably find these other people would have backed off too. So risk, if you're back to Fauzi back in Transtec, Fauzi put his house up as part of the equity. And I later on put some of my personal funding into this kind of development. So there's the risk. Do you believe in it to put your money in? And initially, and I watched the future of Wolfson Microelectronics. Now it was an independent company, a spin-off company. And the feedback that was coming back is that we're now outside the protection of the university with the laboratory facilities, where the university was actually essentially silently picking up the tab. But now that we're having to pay. If they wanted to use university facilities, they now had to pay for it. And there's David Milne, who's now the chief executive, having to pay off some monies because he just couldn't afford to pay their bill. But look at the people. Nokia, Siemens, a huge company, and again the messages from spin-off companies. The big boys, if they want what you're prepared to sell, they'll pay for it, and that's what gives you the name. And other people will then come. And then 1995, essentially 20 years ago, they started designing their own products. And look at that, digital DVDs, CD players. And again, from this modest university laboratory, now to Wolfson Microelectronics, and on they went. And they took it further. And the directors of Wolfson Microelectronics said, they now need to make new products. And they went to the financial houses again, looking for money. And the criticism that Milne got was that you were living in yesterday's technology. That you moved on from analog to digital. And we live in a digital world. But he also learned that you need some very tough financial businessmen if you're going to be running a company. And academics, if academics can do that, they're really quite unique, but most academics don't have it. don't have this kind of expertise. And the money that they got came in advancement against royalties. Look at this, 6 million. 6 million, that's a lot of money. Advancement. And then they went to the bank and they got another 6 million. And then they went to Microsoft. And it's this message again. Spin-off companies, you need the big boys to say that they want what you can sell. And by 2003, they had £15 million to invest from investors. And then they floated it on the London Stock Exchange. And again, David Milne told me that it was the board of directors and this thing about a rock-solid financial plan. And they needed, and again, you and I were talking yesterday, the Dean of Law coming to give the students talks in law. And David Milne found that writing the business, the prospectus to launch this company, they needed lawyers, not just lawyers walking down the street, lawyers that knew about semiconductor technology and they knew about flotation. Believe it or not, actually, the number of my students, one in particular became a barrister. I find often this kind of interplay between engineering and law, or engineering and finance, or engineering and medicine, whether the engineering gives them these kind of analytical skills that lets them tackle needs. And then they learn, and they saw at the capitalization, it entered 130 million shares. And Wolfson Microelectronics is now a big glossy, and it's still based in Edinburgh, this big glossy building. And that all came from a university laboratory. I should say Transtec too, I've not talked about it, but they too, I'd come back into the university after my task was done, but it also was launched in the stock exchange, and Fauzi went on to start his own company again. I'll come back more to that later. And there we are. And this is part of the advertising. And David Milne, he stayed as its managing director just a few years ago. And arguably very, very modest, but very proud of his achievements. Here was another problem. I showed you the trade balance. But here was oil in the UK. The one I showed you with the trade balance showed right out to here. And then oil was discovered in the North Sea. And that kind of very much helped the trade balance. But now oil is going down. And I think actually I've got some water in here actually. Oh, she's going to bring one. That's all right. Okay. I bring one supply. So what do you do when the source of energy that you've got is going down? How do you deal with that? And you know, I don't need to tell you, but basically Dubai, oil, gas, not so much coal, not so much biomass. We talked about nuclear earlier on, or the renewables. You certainly saw, and over the years, the number of applications I've seen coming from the Middle East, research societies wanting opinions on solar energy research proposals. Wind, yes, certainly did that enough in Scotland. Wave, geothermal, or tidal. And there was a unit in Edinburgh set up to exploit wave technology. And that went on for a lot of money going into wave as an alternative in tidal. And about 10 years ago, again, research bodies will only fund these things for a certain length of time. And Wolfson, the man I told you about, he came up to Edinburgh sometime, and I took him to see the work that was going on in Wave. And he said some of the technology that these people are developing, he said, it really is very, very bright. He said they're good bunch of engineers, but eventually they had to stand on their own 2 feet, and they set up a spin-off company called Artemis, which is basically funded by investors. And they located that on university premises. They would pay rent, but the advantage of that is that they were able to draw on the university facilities. But look at the number of employees, 4 or 5. It's quite modest. Okay, so that, so the contracts that they've got coming in, okay, can usually kind of hold that kind of body together. But they went on to hydraulics, whether it's wave energy or tidal energy. The installations that are needed for that are usually immense and beyond the capacity of a university unit. But what they hit on was that if they could focus their expertise into hydraulics, then they had a better chance of selling that kind of technology. And that's what Artemis supported. And eventually they relocated to just outside Edinburgh, and the applications was wind, wave and tidal, of which there are plenty, certainly in Scotland. And there they are now. From 4 or 5, they've cleared up to 45. And look at the number of PhDs. 5. Interesting enough, 2 of them, he's actually now back in the university as a part-time professor. And the other one, he got a professorship. But 5 of them, of the 45 to 50 employees, 10% of them have PhDs. And they go from concept to product. And then they themselves sold out to Mitsubishi. So what do you do with a spin-off company? You either keep it going, you launch it to the stock exchange, or you sell out to another big company. And that's what they decided to do. And there you are. Hunterston is quite near to Glasgow. And it's a big source of wind energy. And some of the technology that these people have developed is actually being installed in the wind turbines there. Here's yet another one. This is one which really has baffled me and surprised me. But this man here, Paul Buckingham, was one of my own students, one of my own mechanical engineering students. And he studied, by that time, Edinburgh University had introduced an undergraduate course, a Bachelor of Engineering course in mechanical engineering with business studies, with management. And I quickly realized that it was an exceedingly popular option. And Mark Paul was one of the first people to take that course. And he graduated, I can't remember whether it was an upper second class or a first class, but very, very bright. And he stayed on after that to do a PhD, not with me, but a PhD in vibration. And another of my young students, Peter Watson, he was doing a postgraduate master's with me. At the end of the time, they said they were leaving. Mark Paul had his PhD, and I said, what are you going to do now? He said, oh, we're setting up a company. And I said, at the age of 26, you're setting up a company? He said, yes, setting up a company. I said, what are you going to be doing? He said, well, I was doing smart materials for my doctorate, and I realized that there was application of this in making snow skis that were free of vibration. He said, well, I decided to set up a company and make them. And I said, well, best of luck. And I thought, gosh, I'll see you guys in the dole queue next year. But off they went, and they set up this company. And I thought, funny name, Xi. And Dr. Nalla, he'll know better than I do, but Xi is actually a symbol in dynamics that used to represent damping ratios. And this is where the pair of them get the idea. Nothing to do with, I thought Xi's Chinese. And what did they do? Well, they said, what do they do? They've got expertise in noise and vibration. They apply it to wind turbines. They've got about 8 employees, but they were a spin-off from the original company that made, they're called Reactec, making vibration-free skis. And again, the message from spin-off companies is that they often, if you set up a company, they'll actually go and set up another company too. And for reasons that I still don't really know, but Mark Paul decided to spin off Xi Engineering from Reactec. And maybe he wants just to run his own company, and also just concentrate on essentially software. So they've got all the expertise. And one of the lecturers in dynamics from Edinburgh University has come in from time to time to help them with, as a consultant, on the vibration problem. But it's multiphysics, optimization, computer modeling, and CFD. All the things that you would see in the courses here. And I'm talking to talk to Mark Paul Buckingham before coming out to Dubai. I just asked him, and I said, well, tell me how all this happened. He said, well, the Reactec thing, he said it was my Master of Engineering project that set me going. He said, I realised it was useful for smart skis. He said, you probably don't recollect. He said, but actually I won a prize for a competition for undergraduates, writing a business model. And this question again, he said, we went to the university, he said, winning this prize, they said if there was intellectual property that could be protected, they would be given help in protecting it. And he said, winning the prize, they then funded protecting the intellectual property. And he said, that's how we were able to launch this company. And things that I still don't understand, due diligence, he said, all that expertise came from the university. And the lawyers, he said, they helped us as young people. And then they got £500,000 of investment. They set up Reactec, and these things called SMART Awards, which are a Scottish Government grant for innovation, where they took a new product. And you can see actually now how this kind of mentality had changed from the days of Fauzi and me scrambling around with Transtec and not really knowing and really trusting or not trusting businessmen who were only interested in the balance sheet. So there we were, and again, that's what they did. Initially, again, this kind of thing, using university laboratory facilities, sports goods, and again, believe it or not, but skiing is actually a big business in Scotland. More popular in Europe, continental Europe. Actually, where I'm staying here, there's a ski centre in the I've not tried it yet, but because again, if you've got a single product, you've got to people become dissatisfied. There's not enough. You've got to be prepared to diversify. So who do they go to? They go to Black & Decker, our tools, when you've got a vibration problem. And Tarmac, a big civil engineering company, saying that they're, as they manufacture and make roads, they're interested in problems of vibration and noise. And then legislation, a condition called white finger. Here are these people supplying the technology. And I did research grants, even from my electric heavy machining days, using tried to introduce technology that would overcome the problem of white finger. And the contracts, again, 2.3 million. Big contracts. Small body company. But again, look at this kind of interesting thing, using university laboratories. And then the crunch again comes when the university has to decide that they can't afford to keep these companies within the premises, and Reactec had to move out from the university. A bit like Artemis, a bit like Wolfson, Microelectronics, and that's when the crunch comes. When the crunch comes, when you're being really spun off, and you're having to stand on your own feet, your own 2 feet, and pay for your premises, and pay for this, and pay for that, pay for the next thing. And maybe that's when Mark Paul to go back and set up the engineering. So there we are. All that has actually made the bodies who run universities, and there'll be an enterprise zone here in Dubai. So how can you actually help the economy? And in Scotland there's a population of about 5 million. Dubai, about 3 million or so, so not dissimilar in size. And their purpose is to encourage R&D. What do they want? Startups and spin-outs, SMEs, and market-led projects. In other words, where the customer says, I need something that we think you can deliver. It's got to be delivered by the market. And an old colleague of mine from Rolls-Royce used to say that to me. He said, there's no point doing R&D if the customer doesn't want it. Go and ask the customer what he or she wants, and then work back, and then you can do the R&D to satisfy them. As opposed to the Research Council mentality, where you do blue skies research that most academics, that's all that they want to do. So there we are. Strathclyde University has been big in spin-outs. I pointed Edinburgh University, you know, for a long-established university, this mentality that really has to help use the intellectual power. It actually surprised me time and time again. And energy, and food and drink, and healthcare. And well, it's not included in today's talk. One of my other younger new graduates went into agriculture. And this year, he will be the chief executive of a company drawing on the need for agricultural produce and the companies that are needed to develop that side of an economy. And everybody needs food. Everybody needs food. So what do they support? Again, 70% of the costs, about 100,000, and again that's, you know, while that might seem relatively modest in sum, basically that's a big investment it's a big investment if there's not necessarily any return on the money. So it is risk. And the IP, the intellectual property, that's got to stay with the company. And it's got to be pre-commercialization. In other words, it's got to be something where there's high risk or low risk. And I'll talk shortly about another spin-off company where where they want. It is research and development, but the emphasis is on development, not research. And that's the difference between university type, blue skies, research. So here are the spin-outs, here are the guidelines, okay? It's got to be the same as in the private sector. So if you as an academic are going to spin off a company, you're treated exactly the same way as John Smith or Mohammed down the street. If he's just an individual, you're treated the same way. And this question about risk, you've got to be prepared to share risk. You're prepared to take some of the liability for what's going on. And if you are going to get money from their university, bear in mind the British University in Dubai is the same as the University of Edinburgh or Glasgow or Manchester or Cardiff. Universities are in the business of education. And then if a university is going to invest in a spin-out company, its terms of condition have to be the same, commercial terms, if it was going to be the XYZ company. And there's going to be a management team, and there's got to be a CEO, and there's got to be a technical specialist. Going back to the Transtec days, the management team was a very hard-nosed, hard businessman who saw the bottom line. And Fauzi, he was much more creative, much more, you could see the application of his work, but he needed a businessman to help him to run his company, whether he liked it or not. Most of the time he didn't like it. Here's just an example. What else is Scotland famous for? It's famous for golf. And one of the companies that they are supporting is dealing with the golf experience. And it's really to a wristband where you can actually follow where the golf ball is. Half the time in Scotland, if you play golf, you lose your golf ball and you wonder where it is, and this is technology that will help you. But bear in mind, they've had 2 grants to develop this kind of technology. Number of jobs doesn't seem great, 3 jobs, but that's not untypical starting these companies. You saw that with Artemis, and you saw it with XI Engineering. Same kind of number. There you are. And I went to hear these people speak just before coming here to Dubai, when I was quite very young, in their 20s. I would say quite naive, but there was a chief executive officer sitting in the background. He was an older guy who was actually much more, obviously running the business for him. And here, to wind up, here is a final example. What do you actually do if you've set up a spin-off company and then you've seen it grow and grow, and you don't want to sit back and put your feet up? And this man, Des Smith, worked in the Royal Aircraft Establishment, Reading and Hereford University in Scotland. And he set up the first spin-out company in Scotland, very first, called Edinburgh Instruments, and it was based on his PhD, where they build spectrometers and gas lasers. And again, if you want to make a success of what you're doing, his spectrometers were put into space probes, analysing for atmospheres, oxygen, CO2, and also, believe it or not, in the North Sea, in diving bells. And about 4 years ago, he sold his shares in EI and Edinburgh Instruments, and instead of sitting back, he set up yet another company called Edinburgh Biosciences, and they employ about 8 employees. He's got 3 people with PhDs, all others are graduates at various stages. And what do? They work in cataracts. Des Smith, the owner, is a cataract problem, and he went in to have his cataract removed by the surgeon, who told him that he needed some way to diagnose cataracts so early on. And Des Smith said, as a physicist, he said, that's right up my street. And Edinburgh Biosciences got funding through the European Community and eye hospitals in Edinburgh, companies in Denmark and Sweden, to develop a technique for not only detecting cataracts, but laser bleaching of the cataract, so that the natural ends cannot necessarily need to be removed. There you are, that just shows cataracts. If you don't have cataracts, that's what your eye tends to look like, the picture. But as time goes on, there are bits here which become a bit hazy, caused by light scattering. And there was a famous artist called Monet, French painter. Monet had cataracts. And some of his later paintings, when he had cataracts, were actually quite brown. Because painters paint what they see. And with cataracts, Monet saw brown. And then later on, these grow and grow. at that stage, the decision has to be made whether to remove the cataract, which means removing the natural lens and replacing it with a plastic, essentially an artificial lens, or doing what Smith and Bob Dillon, the professor of ophthalmology. And again, I would say it's exceedingly high-level science, what they're doing. But the prize there is that if they can develop what they're doing, then they'll have technology by which cataracts can be removed, not by removing the natural lens, but simply bleaching, whitening the natural eye. And again, why do I use that? Another big problem with cataracts is sunshine, of which that's an abundance here. And wearing sunglasses is the way to prevent cataracts developing here. And that's funded by the community. And again, look at the companies: UK, Sweden, Denmark, Germany. But again, another side of this kind of work is time. Anything dealing with medicine, 5 years, 10 years before you can see that product being developed because of the rigors of controls. So that's the story of spin-off companies. And again, here, external examiner, Dr. Rala, here are the questions for your students next year. How do you manage risk? How do you manage organisation? Total quality management? It certainly is multidisciplinary. And what I've learned here is this university has all of those things on offer. And again, thank you very much for letting me come to speak to you.